last one. I
Okay.
don't know.
Hi, everybody. We are in our Gather Bible study, and we are on page 24. We were just discussing this. There are 3 lessons in this one this year, this month. So we're starting with page 24, which is the second lesson of our summer series. So where 2 or more are gathered, flourishing in relationships. So this is about relationships that sustain us. The last month we talked about relationships that nurture us, right? Like from when you're young and that kind of thing. So let's pray.
Gracious and loving God, as Ruth clung to Naomi in her sorrow and loss, we cling to you, our refuge and comforter, in times of heartache. Make us vessels of your compassion. Help us to offer solace and care to those who mourn. Help us to listen deeply, to share in your burdens, and to be a reflection of your care, patient, tender, and full of mercy. Amen.
Let's sing. All right, so I don't know that we'll actually do the reading since we're familiar with this story, and she really reiterates the story over and over again. So I think we're familiar enough with the story. If we feel like we want to reference it, I figure we can. So we start when I was first asked to work on this Bible study. This Bible study session explores the biblical story of Naomi and Ruth. These 2 women held fast to their relationship in the face of great loss. We'll also look at how, during seasons of grief and suffering, we maintain our relationships with others. While we consider healthy relationships, friendships are often overlooked, eclipsed in cultural importance by romantic relationships. Yet friendships are often the first relationships outside of family where we learn important lessons about ourselves. On the playground and other childhood settings, we encounter others who delight in us, seek us out, and tell us that we are important or lovable. Friendships help us to learn empathy, develop our personalities, and grow to adulthood. Healthy friendships lead to healthier romantic relationships. When we have healthy friendships to rely on, we are more resilient, less stressed, and more able to work through difficulties in all of our relationships. 2 of the greatest loves of my life are my 2 best friends, both of whom I met in seminary. We've traveled together through first jobs, dating, marriages, divorces, deaths of parents and a spouse, early days with children, and new phases of our lives. Our friendships have taught me how to care for people, how to grieve with others, and how to hold on to hope when one of us isn't sure what the next day may hold. Of course, friendships are not always easily found. When they end, this can leave us adrift. A 2023 advisory from the U.S. Surgeon General on the epidemic of loneliness and isolation calls loneliness far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both individual and society. It is associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. Churches can help to alleviate this painful isolation toward a kind of holy flourishing for people who are struggling to find connection. Just like intimate relationships, friendships aren't always forever. Friendships can't always hold the intensity of life. Grief and pain can burden any relationship. Sometimes others aren't ready to meet us when life becomes challenging. According to a recent New York Times article, friendship breakups represent an unrecognized kind of grief. Since platonic relationships are often considered unimportant in comparison to romantic ones. There's no map for how to navigate a friendship breakup. For many people, the ending of a friendship can be something that they carry for the rest of their lives. For us, as Christ followers, questions remain. How do we cultivate not just healthy, but holy friendships? How do we stick around when life becomes difficult? How do we grieve the ending of a season of a friendship? How do we learn to be holy friends to others? To start, let's turn to the 2 women who are well known for their friendship. Their holy friendship took them on a journey to new lands and new ways of understanding themselves and their relationships, allowing them to experience the depth of God's love. So, our first question: who is the earliest friend you remember? What attracted you to her or him? And how would you describe your friendship? Earliest one. Mine was the little girl that lived up the street. Her name was Gretchen. And I loved her name. I thought she had the coolest name. But she had this really cool bike, and I didn't have a bike.
Oh.
And so she would let me ride the bike, but the problem with the bike was the chain would always come off of it. So you had to know how to put the chain on. So I learned at a very early age how to put the chain on the bike. But we used to ride that bike. I would ride it and then she would ride it. Yeah, she would let me ride her bike. It was always so much fun. And then we moved, and of course, we lost touch with each other. But
And we moved. I mean, I moved when I was in second grade, then I moved, and I moved when I was it was like first or second grade, and then I moved when I went up to Clear Lake when I was in fourth grade. Then I came out here when I 11th grade. Talking like, the people when I was younger, those people, we were far enough away that we just didn't travel back and forth to those places that we lived. I'm trying to think. I think
phone
the
calls were
kids in
hard.
Fort-
Phone calls were
when we
hard in
went
those
to
days
Fort-
because you had to call long distance. That
Yeah,
was
we-
expensive.
I think the people when I started 4-H, when I was like in fourth, fifth grade, I remember all of the ones that we were at 4-H with, other nieces, those girls. The other ones, I'm trying to think. I know some of the families because we lived in Goldfield and we lived in Rockford, but that. So Darwin always said I knew everybody in North Iowa.
Yeah. Well, you know everybody he doesn't know. That's more accurate.
She's like, he's all, she knows all these things. Well, yes, I do, but
I think my first friend was from here at church of Susan Riss, Bruxford now. I think she was probably my first friend just because of going to church. I had my sister and then it was church and we went through church
you were
all our years and
different things, weren't you?
she wasn't, no,
Well, she
wasn't
never
for it,
was.
no. But for little,
Yeah.
before school, because then she went to Chapin to school, so she didn't go to Sheffield to school until sixth grade. But we were friends here.
Which now when you think of that, there over at Rockford, there was a girl, like a girl named Kay. And then we'd always go to their house and they'd come to our house. But my folks played cards with a group of people. So it was like 15 kids and 8 parents, and they sent us all out to play and they played cards. But that's how we played cards. We got together. They did it together.
And
We didn't leave the kids home. They did it.
how about you, Alex?
The earliest I can remember is a friend that went to Sunday school. We lived in the country, so we didn't have close neighbors to get together with. Well, after we got older, we rode the bikes, but you still had to ride a mile and a half
Yeah.
to the closest
Right.
neighbor. But this girl happened to have her birthday was the same day as my dad's, and so that was one of the first memories I have of Joanne. And then she moved away after her dad passed away, and she moved to Cedar Rapids, and we're friends on Facebook.
Oh,
and
cool.
So
That's
we
awesome.
made that connection, but yeah.
Okay, so our first part talks about the first chapter of Ruth. So we'll just read through this. She kind of summarizes the events of the reading.
Ruth promises to stay with Naomi no matter what the future holds. We often read these promises at weddings, even though her words reflect the platonic love of a holy friendship. There is something beautiful and moving about this holy friendship between a grief-stricken mother and her daughter-in-law. Accompanying one another in grief, they trust that together there is healing. In the end, they find that God's faithful promises are woven into our lives, even when we least expect them. The first chapter of Ruth focuses on Naomi. We learn that a famine has forced Ruth, her husband, and their 2 sons to leave Bethlehem for Moab. Once they settle in Moab, Naomi's husband dies, leaving her to rely on her sons for her well-being. Naomi's identity as a wife and a mother shifts when she becomes a widow. All is not lost, as her sons marry Moabite wives, Orpah and Ruth.
For 10 years, Naomi lives in Moab as a widow, but it would have been expected for her sons to take her into their own homes and care for her. Over that decade, Naomi likely waited for the birth of her grandchildren. But grandchildren do not come. Both of Naomi's sons die, leaving her, as she cries out to her daughters in law, empty. Instead of being cared for by her sons in her widowhood and by their sons after them, now she is alone in a world that is not kind to women, in a land that is not her homeland, without a safety net to support her. Many of us have had these moments of waking up after a loss with no clue of what the next step might be. No to do lists or plans can protect us from the arms of grief. We find Naomi in this desolate place. When my best friend's husband died suddenly and tragically, none of us had a map for how to walk the road of grief together. We thought ourselves too young to face this kind of loss. Although we were all serving as pastors, learning how to grieve this death while serving as a leader of a church community was an unknown territory. Naomi's desolation. Fear and grief are not artifacts of an ancient world, but shared by many of us today. When Naomi determines that she must return to her homeland, Orpah and Ruth, the wives of her dead sons, follow her. Naomi begs them to return to their own families. She reminds them that she is too old to expect a husband or to bear other children. There is a custom of marrying widows to the nearest male relative in their late husband's family. Naomi, who has felt the bitterness of life, begs her daughters in law to leave her to her suffering. But Ruth won't leave her. She tells Naomi that they will be forever tied to one another. So they return to Bethlehem, where Naomi is recognized despite her long sojourn in Moab. Yet Naomi tells people in her homeland that rather than Naomi, she is to be called Mara, meaning bitter in Hebrew. Naomi recognizes that once she was full with a husband and sons and a life that was protected, now she is empty. Her grief becomes her identity. She can't imagine that life will ever be full again. While God never explicitly shows up in the book of Ruth, we get small glimpses of how people feel God's absence and in later chapters, God's presence.
So are these stories of grief? Are there stories of grief in your life? Of course there are. Remember that grief can show up with the loss of a person, relationship, or a variety of other ways. So in times of grief, how have you felt God's presence or absence?
I guess most of the time I've felt God's presence in knowing that the person who died, they believed in God and life after, ever after and that. So I think most of the time it's been God's presence being there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say more presence than absence. I'm just trying to think. I mean, none of us have experienced a spouse that has passed away. I'm trying to think back with Carol and Dave, but I don't know. Dave just, I think he takes it in stride. Everything was just,
You've experienced the loss of a nephew.
yeah, and a nephew too, and to see him, and he must have had a fate because he just plugged on, and I'm like, God, but yeah, so, and on my side, I mean, all my brothers, I've lost a sister, but it's been a few years ago, but I don't know if I don't know.
I know Kim talks about when his dad died when he was 17. And it was very sudden. I mean, he was the last person to see him alive. Of course, there was a lot of guilt there. But he talks about, one of the things he talks about was, that many of his friends did not know how to help. And some of his closest friends, and how much that hurt him.
Kim's
Kim's
Mhm.
friends.
At that age,
at 17.
Yes, and at that age, it would be hard.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
for any kid. And
Right.
he talks about one particular friend that they weren't actually close friends, but I mean, he grew up in a small. I mean, kind of like here, small school district. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everybody's name. Um, and his dad was a very prominent member of the community. I mean, he was a business owner, and I mean, and everybody knew him. And this one friend, I mean, it wasn't, he wouldn't have considered him a close friend, but it was a friend. He said he was one of the most comforting people to him because he didn't say stupid things. He didn't, he was just there.
yeah.
He just showed up and, he just started doing stuff. He would help, he would do little things that would needed to be done, like trimming the hedge and taking care of this. And I think, because of course he and his mom were, I mean, not only were they grieving that loss, they're also grieving, much like Ruth and Naomi, grieving economic hardship and loss that was going to come with that because there was no insurance, there was no money saved, there was no, so there was all that upheaval as well. So, I know he always talks about that, and I don't even remember what his name was, but it was one of his classmates, and about just, I know, and his closest friend, I mean, they're still close friends now. He said it was probably, he was very disappointed in but, as a kid, he didn't recognize that Dave was also grieving.
It was traumatic.
Those two families were very, very, very close. The boys hung out at each other's houses all the time, and they knew each other from tiny toddlers. So I'm sure Dave was grieving as much as Kim was. And when you're in the throes of grief yourself, it's hard to help someone else that's
You
also
just don't know
grieving.
what to say.
And sometimes you just don't know.
I just don't know
Yeah.
what to say.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then it says at the end, can you name people who've walked with you in your grief? I can. Can a couple dozen, but yeah. I know when my dad died, I had again unexpected people who showed up. Just like like Charles showed up here from church, and there were a couple other people here from church, and then of course all my friends from Palo were there. A bunch of the guys from work were there. And, I mean, it was very unexpected. The people that came. It's like comforting too. And the stories they would share. And but I can remember one of the guys I worked with. It was really funny at the beginning. Kim, I think Kim did the eulogy. Or, Steve, he said, he told me, this is much later, probably a couple months later. He says, but he said it was the most awesome funeral because he said I really felt like I knew, even though I never knew your dad. I felt like I knew him. I felt like I knew who he was by everybody that was there and the stories that were being told and the legacy that my dad left behind. And he said, and then the next thing he said was, it made me know you better too, because I knew
where certain
behaviors
Yeah.
and thoughts and ideas came from, the way I am because of the way my dad was.
Mhm.
So it was kind of interesting, but yeah. Anyway, so we can move on. But
I look at Thursday, the group of people that sat
Yes,
downstairs and,
yes, and
and
talked and
visited
talked
and
and
talked and
talked.
talked.
And talked and
Yeah.
talked from Sukkot, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they just talked.
And they were
and
talking
talked.
about their stories. Some of things they were just
Yes.
kind of chuckling.
Yes.
So,
And I think that was very comforting to Gail and to Tina
Yeah.
as well. I don't know if the kids got as much out of it, but yeah.
but I'm sure she just yeah.
But it's just, those people that just show up, and sometimes it's unexpected people that show up, people that you don't really
Mhm.
expect.
And I kind of think back now with Josh being killed in Iraq. My brother Les will go to an awful lot of funerals in this area. He just makes it a point. If he doesn't get to the funeral, he goes to the visitation.
Yes.
You know, he is really good about doing it.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what Kim wrote about in the last
That was
newsletter
good.
too,
I
about
mean,
how
how
we
much
need
it
to, we
means.
need to show
Yes,
up.
yes.
Even if you don't
Mhm.
know the people,
Yeah.
you need to show up.
Right. And I think maybe
Because that's what
is
a
that
church
getting to be
family
Is
does.
that getting to be a lost art?
I kind of think so.
You know,
It's like, yeah.
they just
And again, I think a lot of it is people don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, they don't know,
we go to some of them and you just sit there and visit with the people that are there and they
just listen.
yeah, we just banter back and forth about different things or we'll bring up, oh, do you remember that? And then all of a sudden you're just off in another
Yeah.
realm. Yeah.
Okay, so we're moving on, Marcia. We're at the top of the next column. I think.
Before we jump ahead to Ruth 4, let's briefly review the book's 2 middle chapters. Naomi and Ruth have returned to Bethlehem, and Ruth intends to go and glean from the edges of a field so that they can have grain to eat. Deuteronomic law commanded that what was left on the edges of the field after a harvest ought to be saved by landowners for widows and orphans to harvest on their own. When Ruth goes out, she comes upon a field owned by Boaz, a pillar of the community and a distant relative of Naomi's late husband. Ruth is noticed by Boaz, who wonders why she is gleaning in his field. When someone identifies her to him, Boaz praises her for her faithfulness to her mother-in-law. He commands his farmhands to help and not harass her. Then Boaz invites Ruth to eat and drink and enacts a faithful promise to her that echoes what Ruth did for Naomi. As Luther Seminary professor Catherine Schifferdecker, the Alva B. Lovell Chair of Old Testament, states in her commentary on the Book of Ruth, a coincidence is a miracle in which God prefers to remain anonymous. In Ruth 2, we see how faithful and holy friendship begets faithful and holy friendship. As readers, we can imagine that Ruth stumbling into Boaz's field is not mere coincidence, but the faithfulness of God. When Naomi hears of Boaz's kindness to Ruth, she pushes her to find Boaz and lie down with him. Though the text is somewhat unclear, we can guess that Ruth finds Boaz after a particularly rowdy night and lies down next to him. When he wakes, Ruth tells him to spread his cloak over her, or, as Schifferdecker writes, to marry her. Boaz sends her away kindly, promising he will do as she asks.
So where you go, I will go also, right? So we're not going to read, we'll just keep going because she summarizes this pretty good.
Okay. As chapter 4 opens, Boaz is doing some business at the city gate with an unnamed next of kin who seeks to purchase the land that is Naomi's. When Boaz reminds him that he will also have to take Ruth as part of this deal, he quickly leaves. This allows Boaz to purchase the land and make Ruth his wife. The two wed. Ruth becomes pregnant and gives birth to a child, Obed. The women of the town surround Naomi, reminding her that this child is life and nourishment, especially for a woman who has renamed herself Bitterness, feeling that her life was empty and without hope. Obed continues the family line that Naomi once believed had ended. Even in her old age, Naomi is able to be a nursemaid for this baby. Sometimes in the middle of our own stories, a final chapter like this seems inconceivable. After all, Ruth, a little book of just 4 chapters, contains hope and promise. Excuse me. Hope and promise amid incredible loss and grief. While we can glean from this book's lessons of hope and faithfulness, this study is focused on what the text tells us about friendship and what that means for us as faithful friends.
So, holy friends. Imagine that Naomi is your friend, a friend who has suffered an incredible loss. Her husband has died, and her 2 sons. Imagine learning that this person you love is caught up in such an unspeakable loss that she can't imagine anything beyond her grief. She is so heartbroken that she can no longer be called by her own name. Imagine how she would talk to you about her loss with tears and body-shaking sobs. Now try to feel how you would want to respond to a grief this profound. If there is one consistent fear that comes up among seminary students in my Intro to Pastoral Care class, this is it. When someone has faced unspeakable tragedy, How do I know I won't say the wrong thing? How do I know what to do? How do I keep from making it worse? Megan Devine, author of It's Okay That You're Not Okay, is a therapist who specializes in grief. One of the hardest parts of grieving, she says, is recognizing how many people cannot tolerate your grief with you. The reverse is also true. Sometimes we are the ones who find it hard to be with a friend in their grief. Whether we dismiss their grief, you'll marry again, everything will be all right, make your helpfulness the center of the story. I'm doing so much for you. Why haven't you said thank you? Or find that being with them is too hard, you might realize that you aren't naturally equipped to face the enormity of their grief with them. Maybe we said the wrong thing. Maybe we were silent because we didn't know what to say. Or maybe we just wanted to drop off our casserole and get out as fast as we could. We have a cultural belief that grief isn't the problem. Our work to find a solution is at the center of our discomfort. If we can shift our mindset to recognize that grief is an experience that needs support rather than a problem to be solved, we can walk alongside grieving people in a new way. She explains, it seems counterintuitive, but the way to truly be helpful to someone in pain is to let them have their pain. Let them share the reality of how much this hurts, how hard this is, without jumping in to clean it up, make it smaller, or make it go away. As the book of Ruth reminds us, in holy friendships there is space for the enormity of grief. To be a holy friend, we refrain from trying to solve our friend's pain and instead accompany them through it. One of my best friends, Pastor Colette Brody Grund, who I mentioned at the beginning of the study, has faced more than her share of losses. Her first marriage ended in divorce, and her second husband died suddenly and tragically. In addition, her grief had to be lived publicly, as the congregation she served walked with her through that difficult terrain. She has taught me and many others that we are not alone in our grief, because God also knows what it means to grieve. Out of her own pain, she created the Grief Lectionary, a resource that tells those who grieve, God's people and God's self has felt what you feel, and lived what you are living, and struggled as you are struggling. You can find that on her website. The Book of Ruth provides a structure for engaging grief as a friend and as a griever. Naomi speaks powerful truth in her loss, and Ruth stays with her, vowing to follow her wherever she goes. Ruth doesn't try to minimize or promise a life beyond the one that Naomi experiences. Ruth merely promises to be there as the story unfolds, accompanying Naomi through it. So when you experience powerful emotions like grief, what do you often feel you need from others?
It's the word. How huge is it? I'm sorry, or
Do you need for people to stay close to you or move away? This is different for everybody. Yeah. And there are times that you just,
Well, I think there's times you want the people there, but then there are times you're just okay just to be by yourself.
you need to process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody's different in that respect. Some people need more of that alone time, that more processing. I got it. And other people need more.
Interaction with people.
Yes. And I think that has to do with whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, that kind of thing. Yeah. So does your need change as time passes?
probably.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess so. Or even as each day it might be different. One
Right.
day might be like, oh my God, I can't deal with this today.
But then the next day,
It might be like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. Because I can't figure out how to fix this. Right. Yeah. Do you feel the need for practical help, presence, or both? Yes. Sometimes practical is, yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you just need somebody to help with.
somebody come in and do the dishes or somebody to do the vacuum the,
Well,
some of those kind of things, or
I'm trying to think of what it was when after Dad died, something went wrong with something at the house. And it was like, I was like, I have no idea how to fix this. Dad always fixed it. It's like,
Yeah.
okay,
Mhm.
well, let's
Mhm.
see what we can figure out. So we just, I don't think that's how, well, Mom, he's not here. I think I said that more than once. We're going to have to figure it out for what works for us. Okay, well, all right. Okay. And I know what it was. My dad had got full. My dad was a tax accountant. Okay. And always did, I mean, he did all the companies fight, all the companies' taxes. He also did all of his own taxes. Okay. And I mean, he was always just every deduction you could find and blah this and blah that. Most of us just do the end of itemized, we just do the general deduction and call it good
but
with
he was
life.
checking.
Oh Lord, no, he was reading and rereading,
Uh-huh.
rereading, and before he died, he dug out the taxes and he said, "Now, Dorothy," he says, "I'm going to go through all this with you." And my mom was so she, and I got to give her credit because she just sat there the whole time. He's going, it was important to him,
Mhm.
but she knew what to do, so she went through it all. She sat and listened to it all. And well, then after he died and it came time to do all the taxes, she took him to a friend. She said, "Can you please do these taxes?" Because yes, I can.
That's a hard thing to do. Why would she want to get into all that?
It was so funny. It was just like she said, like, and I can remember her telling me about it after. That was one of those kind of funny moments. She said, "Yeah, I don't." She said, "I sat there the whole." She said, "I must have sat there for 2 days listening to him go on." But it's important to him. It was really important to him that she knew what to do and where everything was.
But she probably knew I probably won't be there.
And just see her just thinking that. Seeing her brain just going, yeah.
My doctors.
We always used to do when we were kids, Dad would come home from work and he'd sit at the table and he'd start talking about some tax deduction that he found for some state, for some company. And it's like, and we're all like, okay, Dad, that's really good. That would hurt your feeling to tell you we really don't, but we're proud of you. So anyway, this next part is really good. As I read through this, I thought this is really something I kind of feel like we need to, and I might ask permission to do this, to publish this like in the newsletter. Like these are some really practical ways to help people who are grieving.
So I was just sitting here thinking about it. After people pass away, it doesn't matter what their age is, except when you have younger ones who pass away, and just realizing how short life can be, and trying to process that their life was this short when they had all these possibilities lying before them, and coming to terms with that. I think that's where I have the most difficulty is
Well, it's
younger.
like all the little girls and boys.
Oh,
my God.
Yeah.
Pictures of the girls in the study. It's hard
Oh,
to
yeah. I said, how many bears do we have to send?
I'm sending two. I'm sending one to the mayor of Kerrville.
Oh.
I'm sending one to the camp. Apparently, they also lost their director in all of this. But I mean, they posted a video today. I can't remember where I saw it. It was on the Weather Channel. I can't remember. But one of the camp, I don't know if everybody knows the full story, and I don't know that this is the full story, but it sounds like they received the weather warning early in the morning, and they got all the kids up and they started getting them packed up into the buses to get them transported down, to safer places. And I don't know if they didn't get all the girls, or I'm not quite sure how that story all played out, but there were at least 3 buses of kids or vans of kids. I don't know if buses or vans, whatever. And there's actually a video, and you can hear the girls singing in the background.
Yes, I heard that.
And it was like, oh my God. It was just heart wrenching. And then they posted those pictures. I was like, oh my God, those families.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the one guy that was rescuing so many
Yes.
people.
Yeah, the guy that he was just a newly trained
Right,
Coast Guard
just
guy.
got trained
Yeah.
a couple weeks ago
And
or
he pulled
something.
out like 130 people out of
Yeah.
the water. Yeah. It's like, holy
Yeah,
cow.
and Holly said the girls were just asking about their friends, where
Yeah.
are our friends? Where are our friends? And he said, I don't know that, He said, I don't know that right now.
And he's triaging. I guess he
Yeah.
was triaging them as he was going
Yeah.
through. And it's like, oh my God, holy cow. But I know it's really sad with. Yeah, I think there were 24 campers, right? And then are there 12 still missing? I think that's
I don't know about the rest.
But I mean, there were over 700 at the camp.
Yeah, 750.
I
Yeah,
heard that.
yeah,
How it's
counselors
so
and
good.
What?
they really did
They-
well to get a lot of people to safety as quickly as they could.
Yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
sure that was right.
I mean, that was one thing that I felt like really got not. Maybe they didn't know the facts then either.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
I mean, they
That
were
wasn't
talking
put out
about.
there to begin with.
No,
I'm
I mean,
sorry,
it
but-
seems like they just want to condemn the
Yeah.
camp for being so
Yeah.
irresponsible
Yeah.
and
But-
blah this and blah that. And it's like, no, my God.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
holy cow. And then and then there was a time lapse picture of the river, how it starts kind of as a trickle.
Trickle.
In 30 minutes, it went from a trickle to what, 100 yards wide
Mhm.
and just raging. I mean, raging. I mean, it was just the most scary thing I've ever seen. It's like, holy
Yeah.
cow.
There was something too about the sirens. They were due to be replaced
Right.
and that, and they had it in the plan to purchase them,
Right.
but it would be after the camp was closed and that, and so the new.
But it sounds like, I mean, they got the warnings, and it sounds like they're
Mhm.
doing their best to get everybody
Everybody.
safety. Now, whether they actually did or
Yeah.
not, I don't know.
But 750
Yeah.
That's a
to
lot.
get them
Yeah.
Out of there.
Yes.
Out of there. That's a lot.
Yes.
A lot of people. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still, I mean, clearly it wasn't enough, but I mean, I still can't imagine that grief. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just,
Yeah.
when they showed the mayor on TV, you could just see the grief in his face. I mean, it was just, they're just heartsick. It's just like, oh my God, you just want to.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Anyway, I really felt like this checklist is really, really cool. I mean, it's very practical, very down to earth. So, I thought maybe we'll read each one and then maybe
Just
we could
read
talk
each
about,
one.
yeah. So we'll talk about each one.
When teaching students how to care for people facing loss and grief, there is no checklist that can provide that describes exactly what to do in any situation. Caring for friends and loved ones is much more complex. However, Megan Devine suggests that the following themes can guide how we care. Grief belongs to the griever. Remember Naomi's cries before and after Ruth promised to stay with her. It's clear that Ruth, who says nothing about her own dead husband, does not grieve the same way. Grief shows up for each person differently. There is no right way to grieve. How different our story would have been if Ruth had shushed Naomi or told her that she was making her sadness worse. When we allow grief to unfold for a griever, rather than trying to control the expression of their grief, we empower people to feel their feelings in ways that are healing and needed for them. Which is true. I mean, some people, a couple days after something happens, and the funeral's done, they're kind of back into the routine, and other people, it just really takes a long time for different people. So
Well, and sometimes, it's dependent on, like for Kim and his mom, they didn't really have time to grieve. So it was like, we got to figure out how we're going to survive.
right, so you've got to go to the next stage.
You just don't have time to grieve. I mean, they grieved, but they grieved in probably some unhealthy ways. For Kim, it was a lot of anger and frustration, and for Kim's mom, it was the opposite. It's like, I've got a child. I've got to take care of my child. I have to take care of myself. I have to take care of my mom. It's like, what do we do now? It's like she was a very practical person. And if there's young children involved, then you've gotta,
yeah,
you've gotta deal with, how that's gonna work. It's like, oh, golly. jeepers.
Like when my folks died, and of course, I didn't know all this because I was only just turned 7. My brothers were older, I did not know how they were going to decide what to do with us, what's going to become of us. That never entered my mind. I mean, just my aunt and uncle showed up in a little while and then they went back and they moved, but I didn't know that there were 3 different couples that had offered to take all of us.
Wow.
And they asked my brothers who they would choose.
Wow. So were you the youngest then?
No, my sister
Your
was 1
sister's-
year younger than me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And your brothers are how much older than 5?
Jay was 6.5 years older, and Roger was 9.5 years older. So they were 13 and 16.
Yeah, so
and
they
I
were-
was just
they
turned
were old.
7. It was a week after my 7th birthday when they died.
And I'm sure they tried really hard to protect you.
And I didn't even know about this till just what were we talking about it? Not that long ago. Wow. I think after Nona died, that came out, and I had never known that, and I don't know who the other 2 couples were. They never
Wow.
told me, but yeah.
Yeah, but her comment here is, you can't assume that grief has a timeline.
Right.
I mean, I still hear things on the, I'll see some silly commercial on TV and I'll think, oh my God, Dad loved that, or he did that, or it's like, oh, it just pulled at my heartstrings.
I have these times when I think, oh, I have to ask my dad.
Yeah.
I have to ask my mom.
Yeah.
No.
Duh!
I can ask, but
Yeah.
how are you going to answer me?
Yeah.
It may come.
Find that piece of paper. That
Yeah.
And maybe you'll have a little piece of paper comes from me. Okay, so the next one. Marcia, you want to read that next one?
State the truth. Instead of telling Naomi that her husband was in a better place or that God needed another angel, Ruth simply states the truth. I will go where you go. We can support our loved ones by resisting the parts of ourselves that want to soothe grief by suggesting that everything is actually okay. It's enough for us to acknowledge that this situation is deeply painful, that we are here, and that we love and care.
Yeah, that's that time that you just, you don't know what to say, so then yeah. Especially if someone's like suffered from cancer for like Drew.
Well, like Drew, half of his
Yeah.
life. Half of his life is, we're just going like, oh.
That still isn't going to make Dave feel better to know that.
No.
That's
No.
yeah. Or you guys,
Well,
that matter. I
And,
mean,
and just to know, Crystal's
look at
doing
Crystal.
fine,
How about her and how she feels?
Well,
and-
how she feels, because who knows what's going to be happening down the road with her. I mean, hers looks okay now.
yeah.
But, and I guess I really approached her how the 2 little girls,
Yeah.
the 2 adopted little girls they have, what their perspective is. But they've been always around, right from the beginning. And of course, if they came up to see Drew, the girls were always with them. So, they were right there.
But I think that's important.
And
We need to understand that death is a part of life.
Right.
I worked
We
with
want
Gail.
to shelter people.
I worked with Gail today at the Sharon shop. So we were talking. I said, oh, that little Raina, she's so cute,
Uh-huh.
And how she took it, how her parents, explained everything to her, and she just took it and when he died, then they took her, and got her away from things, and then
Right.
when they came back, she said, Grandpa, where'd Grandpa go? He's not in his bedroom. And I can't remember what Gail said. Were Gail trying to keep in mind what her parents had said to little Rainy, and everything, and I don't know what Gail said. But maybe I should repeat this, but it was so darn cute. Something about he's up in the cupboard. That's what she heard. He's up in the cupboard, and I'm trying to think what word Gail said that he's up in. I don't know what word she used, up in heaven, but she heard cupboard, and she went out and said to her good Grandpa, something great, whatever she calls him, great papa or something. He's up in the cupboard.
It's funny. It's like Rugrats. Remember Rugrats? I used to, if you ever watch Rugrats on Nickelodeon, the parents would talk to the kids and then what they would hear and just repeat
What
back.
they would-
It's
What they heard, but it's like they had talked to her, and she was so, she took
It
it all.
wasn't a tragic
No.
type
And
thing.
she, they were there. She was there, but I just had to laugh because she said we had to laugh. We just had to laugh because it just.
I think kids can sometimes take things a lot better than
Yeah.
Yeah,
than we
Yeah.
can.
and yeah,
When Milo passed away, we took Malachi to the funeral home and talked to him about his great grandpa had been sick. He'd been in the hospital and he died. Why did you put him in a suitcase?
His vision of a coffin.
That's what the coffin was to him. It's like a suitcase.
God, that's funny.
And it's
She was packing for a long journey.
Yeah.
Marilyn Wheatley, her kids, when Fred passed away, of course, they went to the funeral home over here. And I think they were saying, so does Grandpa have his shoes on?
Yeah.
You know,
Put him in the
Yeah.
house, but
All
yeah,
these
they
questions.
just wanted to know.
Yeah.
You know, does he have his shoes on? And so, yeah,
Mhm.
it's just
I'm not wearing shoes. I'm out of here. I'm going barefoot. You got that? I'm going barefoot.
I've been to my great grandma's funeral at the church. It was an open casket funeral, which they evidently did which that was a big first thing for seeing that. But my other great grandma, they had the visitation at their home in front of the big
Yeah.
doily window.
Yeah.
And we went to the church and had
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the church records here talk about, the funeral happening at the home and then the
Yeah.
burial was at the cemetery, or they went from the home to the church to the
Mhm.
cemetery. It's like,
yeah.
whoa.
Mhm.
It's like,
Yeah,
holy
it
cow.
was-
And there was the one big funeral, was that was the dad and the son that died from the lightning strike?
Oh,
August Stork.
Was it Stork?
Yeah, I think it was
Maybe
August Stork.
Stork.
Anyway,
okay.
they talk about it's in the obituary files. There's this whole big thing about the horse-drawn carriages. They had horse-drawn
Oh.
carriages that took them from the home, from the farm to the. They went somewhere else, and then the church, and then the cemetery. I think is what it was. But it was all long and drawn. I
detail.
mean, man, that
Oh.
had to have been like a whole day affair. I mean, oh my gosh.
So my one
Good grief.
grandpa up in Manly, it was in the D.D. Knowles passes away. The police
Yeah.
parked the car. I mean,
And
or
block this
parked-
intersection.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like
Millions
this.
of cars lining
Yeah,
it's like, oh
it
my
was-
cow, I know. The way they used to write
Wow,
some of
but
those.
he was a businessman in town.
Yeah,
He was the general
exactly.
store.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah,
but
it was a big
just-
deal.
It was a big deal. Yeah,
But it's important to state the truth.
Yeah, it was true.
Right? Okay, so let's go on to the next one,
Okay.
shall we?
That was
Number
three.
three.
This is not about you. When our friends and loved ones are facing tragedy, they aren't good at being our friends. That's okay. We might start to have our own questions about God or why bad things happen. We might feel sad, scared, angry, or just confused. We also need a circle of friends who care for us as caregivers. Grieving people do not have the capacity to care for us too.
Yeah, that's a real important one.
Even if it's like your best friend. You keep on it. You gotta understand that they're not in the place where they can
Take care of.
to take care of you. You need other people to take care of you, like your husband or your kids or whatever. But yeah. All right, the next one, number 4. Anticipate, don't ask. Decisions during times of acute grief are hard. Try to notice things that may need to be done: meals, dog walks, school drop-offs, and support your friend in these ways. Check in, but suggest what might be helpful rather than asking them to give you a list. Remember that the answer to your helpfulness may be no, and that's all okay too.
That's a thing. So often and I'm guilty of it, is say, well, if there's anything you need, let me know. If there's anything I can do, let me know. That's not the right thing to say. It's,
Yeah.
can I do
Can we?
this, or,
That's the
be
hardest thing. And to
specific
know
about something.
what would
what.
really.
Yeah, what? Like mow the lawn, the garden,
Well, or
Go
take
get
or help at
groceries.
the sharing shop.
go get groceries, or go,
Yeah, I know when Cliff was when Louise and Cliff were having a good time. That was one of the things. We got a couple calls about groceries and something. Okay. But they called. So
Yeah,
I was like, if they called, maybe we better. So, and I think they called it in to Fairway. We said, okay, just.
And I know Cheryl and Frank went over there quite a few times. Dick Brown.
Well, and I think Marlene and Tom did a
Yeah.
couple times too. And they were still here.
Darwin pulled weeds there the other day after the big tree loom fell
Oh,
on the house
geez.
next door. And he went over and checked it and come back and Louise must have stuck her head out. So I was gonna come out and Louise pull some weeds or
How
something.
did she do that?
I don't know, but Darwin just says, I'll just pull them here before I go back home.
There you
I
go.
don't know if it was the
So
front
that's
door.
one of those things where
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
just do it
Yeah.
really quick
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
I don't know how Darwin could do it, but
I don't know either, but he said he
Get
pulled.
up.
I don't know what weeds they were or where they were at, but he just said she stuck her head out and wondered.
yeah,
I mean, that could have been it could have landed on their house, and then they would have had
Yeah.
an issue too. Besides that.
Okay, so the last one. Oh no, is it? Oh, there's
Nope,
two
there are
more.
two more.
Two more. Okay, so
one.
it's 5.
Okay. Run interference and educate. After this study, I hope that you feel a bit more equipped to face the grief of a friend. Consider running interference and being the point person who helps organize everyone's help. In those moments, you can educate others about how to care for the grieving that we are not there to fix, but instead to bear witness. Like Ruth, we can simply stay when grief feels hard, uncomfortable, even unfixable.
that's a good one.
Yeah, it is.
Run interference.
Yeah, sometimes it's good to have that person.
Somebody there that can just say,
And help organize things.
Mhm.
'Cause if you're alone at that, if it would be a spouse or something and you're alone, people are coming and they're bringing you food. They're, yes.
And I think that's what we had interference with Les and Sandy, because they had to come back from Mexico after Josh had been killed, and they had to go down and get them. Somebody had to go down and tell them there, and then come back on the airplane. And I know she was in the bedroom. I think she was in her bed for a couple of days.
Yeah.
So we would just say, "Can we stop by and visit a minute?" Or if they were running interference there. Because they just didn't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
So
I know when Mandy fell, we had some people that were helping run interference for us. I never really noticed it at the time, but when I read through this, I was kind of thinking about that and about some people that we had just, like a bunch of the guys from Helicorp got together and just said, you know what, if we pool our miles, we can pay for, because Kim was trying to figure out how we were going to pay for him to get over there, because they paid for me to go, but they weren't going to pay for him to go. So a bunch of the guys got together and they pooled all their miles, their airplane miles,
sure.
their airline miles, and made sure that he had a flight so he could get over there and get back. And and then we had a couple people who were like, okay, I'm going to organize this stuff and we're going to get this all together and we're going to get it all in one suitcase so that you guys can take it with you. And kind of like they did with the medical stuff when they took it over to Tanzania. And then there was somebody else that organized, I can't remember. Oh, they took care of Nick. There were a couple times where, because he was, gosh, how old was he? He was probably 16 by then. No. Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was 16.
So they just were there to take care of him.
But just kind of keep an eye on him.
Yeah.
One of them was his band director, Guy Blair, and he just died a couple years ago, or a year ago. But he really ran. They really kind of ran, just kind of kept an eye on Nick and make sure, giving him his, but still kind of keeping an eye on him, making sure that he's, not getting into trouble or he's eating and taking care of himself, or that kind of thing. Because my parents were only 45 minutes away, but they were still 45 minutes away. And my mother-in-law was in the nursing home at the time. So it's it was very tumultuous. But then we had people who stepped up and went over and were taking care of her when we knew we couldn't. You know, it's like we had a lot of people that were just really making sure that, you know, there was that buffer, but that we could still let them know what was going on and we could let them know what we needed. And, you know, that was, and like, think we had one guy that all he did was take us to the airport and pick us up. I don't know how many times he took me to the airport and then he drove Kim home and then he took Kim to the airport. Oh no, and he drove me to the airport to pick up Kim before I even went. Because again, in the middle of a snowstorm, and he's like, "Yeah, you're too frazzled to be driving, so I'm just going to drive you up there," which was awesome. And then he drove us up when it was time for me to go, and then he drove Kim up when it was time for him to go. Then he came up and picked me up and brought me home. It was just like it's like, you know,
Car service.
yeah, it really was, and it was such a relief, you know, after you've done it a long flight like that. The last thing you want to do is climb into a car and drive for an hour. It's like, holy
And
God.
just to know somebody was there to pick you up.
And just so somebody was here. Yes, what's there?
That's right. It's funny to just kind of, yeah, you know, let you
I'm here.
decompress a little
Let's
bit.
go.
Yeah, it was awesome. So yeah, I always felt like that's a really, you know, you don't think about that, and that's probably one that's kind of one of those behind the scenes kind of things.
Yeah.
You know, just making sure that, you know, you get what you need, and or like making sure that things are ready for a funeral. You know, even though we go through things like not having AC, and then have the AC, and then the other unit goes out. And
Gail had something to say about that. I didn't know the other one.
well,
was
we
going
didn't want her to know.
I wanted you to know.
We didn't want you to stress about it. So
Yeah.
that's one of those
Yeah.
moments where we just took care of it. We just made
Yeah.
sure that it was all okay.
Yeah.
She didn't need to know.
No.
You know, and that's the time when Tina really was confronting interference.
Yeah.
Just mom doesn't need to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tina and Cindy and Todd just said, no,
Mhm.
Yeah.
she doesn't need to know.
Yeah.
This is good. We'll just say, okay, we're going to have the visitation here and
Yep.
leave it here.
Yeah, well,
She
that
didn't need-
part, you know, we worked out, and
Right.
that was actually good that we worked it out that way.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, because they didn't get it fixed. You know,
No.
I mean, they got it fixed, but it wouldn't have been cool enough in here to make it work. So, and then leaving the body overnight definitely would not have been a good,
Not a good idea.
not a good idea.
Yeah.
So it all worked out the way it was supposed to, but boy, that was a lot of,
Yeah.
and we just made sure that she didn't know. She didn't need to know.
Mhm.
It was unimportant.
Yeah.
To the long run, I think. So the last one. Is that yours, Marcia?
Is it me?
Yeah, I think so.
Finally, love. Listening with love is central to this work. Just as God is faithful to us, we can learn to be faithful friends to others. We can do this work with love because we have been fully loved. When we make a mistake, we can trust that God's grace is enough, apologize, and try again.
So we kind of already talked about all these. I thought it was more important to talk about them as we did them. But were there any that you thought of that she didn't miss? I think these are very practical suggestions. They're very,
That would be good.
you know, it's not that
you
whole
get it.
pie in the sky. Oh, do this and do
Yeah,
that and do this.
yeah.
No, you just don't know. It's different with different people. So
Mhm.
Different situations.
I do think it's important. One of the things I think it's important to realize that, you know, if you knew the person well that died, that you're also grieving.
Mhm.
You know,
To understand, yeah.
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
to understand that you're grieving too,
Mhm.
and that, you know, you have to recognize that grief in yourself. You know, it's like on the airplane, you know, they say, you know, you need to put your own oxygen mask on and then help your dependents or your neighbor or whoever, but take care of yourself first. I think that's always important to remember. So, all right, so we ready to do the closing prayer?
Okay.
Pour into our hearts, O God, and Holy Spirit's gift of love, that we may share the joy of friendship, human and divine, revealed in the love of Jesus Christ, who lays down his life for his friends, and in whose name we pray. Amen.
So, yeah, good study. So we'll see you guys later.
We'll see you guys.
Always love you.
Bye.